He says 50 isn't the new normal, and yet he does, or at least the dot plot would indicate the Fed thinks they will be cutting 50 more basis points by year end.
By the end of the year, but there are 2 meetings more before the end of the year, so they could do 25 at each one of those. And of course, he gave the ritual statement that we are not on a preset path, and if something changes, we'll change. So it is always possible that they do more or less than 50. But it's next year that's really the focus of the markets. And what they basically timed it out is for 1 cut each quarter, 25 basis points each quarter, which would bring us down another 100 basis points by the end of 2025. But that's 200 basis points of cutting just to keep the unemployment rate steady.
You talked to the chair about the labor market. There's a thought, of course, that the Fed's too late. And you wanted to get to how sensitive the Fed will be with labor data going forward. How worried should Jay Powell be about the job market?
Well, that's the interesting question, and I don't think they know. The SOM rule, of course, posits that when you get to a certain level of unemployment, it all of a sudden shoots up higher. We hit the SOM level, but we haven't seen unemployment shoot up higher, and the Fed's not forecasting that, but it is always a possibility. Problem for the Fed is that with inflation, they were data dependent. They did not want to cut rates till they had data showing them for sure that they were going to get down close to their 2% target. But with unemployment, you don't know what's going to happen month to month. So does that suggest that they need to be more preemptive? Was what I was trying to get out of him, which he did not give us. He just said we will react to the data as they come in.
Michael, it's great to have you in Washington, as always. Bloomberg's Michael McKee, fresh from the Federal Reserve. Earlier today, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance had this reaction to the Fed decision.
My reaction is my reaction is a half a point is nothing compared to what American families have been dealing with for the last 3 years. When Donald Trump left office, a lot of Americans were getting 3-4% mortgages. Now they're getting 8% mortgages. A half a point is not going to help those families a whole lot.
And so we turn to the political reaction following the Fed's half-point rate cut, with help from Dallas and Bloomberg Texas bureau chief Julie Fine. Julie, it's great to see you here. Donald Trump has already said at a stop he just made at a Bitcoin bar in New York that this was a political move. What are we hearing from Washington?
Well, in terms of Washington, let's start with the current president, who, of course, is applauding this. And then you look at Vice President Kamala Harris. She actually took today's announcement saying it is a good thing, but that more needs to be done for the American people. So I think on the campaign trail, you're going to continue to hear a lot more of that. Let's look at Elizabeth Warren. She basically said, OK, this is good. It waited too long. This should be a bigger interest rate cut. And then you are hearing from Kevin Cramer much of what you heard from the former president, that this is political. That is his tweet right there. That's what he had to say about it. So I think politicians on both sides of the aisle will continue to spin this, and they'll try to spin this for the voters. One thing I do expect to hear from Republicans, as that Jay Powell also saying today, the influx over the border, well, that has affected unemployment. You can certainly expect to hear Republicans talk about that. You will hear Democrats talk about how they are the party that can take care of the economy and make things better. However, all of this is up to the voters and how it does affect them. So if they're not seeing lower prices, if they're not feeling it, interest rates, well, they need to have it address them, and they need it to address them personally in order to affect the vote.
Well, Julie, those two issues you just mentioned, both the economy and the border, the latest Quinnipiac polling in the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, does show Kamala Harris gaining some ground there, actually within 2 points of Donald Trump on the economy in Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Well, certainly it appears that Democrats are in much better place with her at the top of the ticket. If you remember, President Biden was not polling well on that at all. So she is coming closer to the former president there. However, he still does have the lead right now. So it'll be a question of how all of this will affect the voters, what they are going to see in their pocketbook, and what they're hearing and feeling when it does come time for the election, especially in those swing states.
All right, Bloomberg's Julie Fine, thank you so much. Now, we also want to mention earlier today, the Teamsters Union declined to endorse Donald Trump or Kamala Harris for president. The union's president, Sean O'Brien, released a statement saying, in part, unfortunately, neither major candidate was able to make serious commitments to our union to ensure the interests of working people are always put before big business, adding that we sought commitments from both Trump and Harris not to interfere in critical union campaigns or core Teamsters industries and to honor our members' right to strike, but were unable to secure those pledges. This marks the first time the union has not endorsed a presidential candidate since 1996. And Joe, of course, Donald Trump is calling this a victory for himself today. Not that he got the endorsement. He did not, but because Kamala Harris didn't either.
And the rank and file seem to be leaning in Trump's direction. The House, meantime, set to vote this evening, shortly after we're done here on Balance of Power, on a 6-month continuing resolution on government funding with the so-called SAVE Act attached. It is expected to fail, with the deadline to avert a government shutdown now less than 2 weeks off. House Speaker Mike Johnson had this to say about it earlier today.
So here we are at the fiscal cliff at the end of the fiscal year. September 30th is right upon us. We don't have two sets of bills, as is supposed to be the system, for the House and Senate to go and negotiate together, because the Senate brings nothing to the table. So it is the Senate that has put us in a situation to have a CR to not shut the government down.
Joining us now is Mike Dorning, who helps to lead Bloomberg's congressional coverage, and no stranger to countdowns, to shutdowns. Mike, I don't think you see one coming here, but
I do not.
Mike Johnson knows that the Senate is going to jam the House, as they say, as soon as this bill fails, right?
Well, jam the House, but this is what most people in the House really want in the end anyway. No one who's running for re-election wants to run for re-election where they've shut down the government, basically, except for people in very safe seats that they know they're not going to lose. So there will be overwhelming pressure to kick the can down the road until after the election.
But what about the pressure coming from someone who's trying to win the presidential election? Former President Trump on True Social this afternoon says, and this is a quote, if Republicans don't get the SAVE Act and every ounce of it, they should not agree to a continuing resolution in any way, shape, or form. Is he going to pressure Republicans to shut the government down?
It's a question of how much he would pressure them on that. It certainly serves Trump's own personal interests in his presidential campaign to have a fight over these election questions and something that can focus the conversation on immigration or illegal immigration in any way, shape, or form and make that the issue going into October. That said, shutting down the government, or particularly an extended government shutdown, creates risks for him, too, because they would probably be blamed on Republicans. There is no reason why sitting House Republican members of Congress who actually face a competitive election want to have a shutdown. So at the end of the day, I would bet, and I would certainly think the risk of a shutdown is very low before the election.